success workbooks focused on personal and career readiness for diverse college students. Sabby is humbled to be the first in their family to earn a doctorate degree. Sabby uses she/her and they/them gender pronouns. Connect with Resilient Campus on Instagram at Resilient Campus or online at resilientcampus.com. Please welcome Dr. Sabby.
Thanks, Tori. Thanks for having everybody. Thanks for having me and for your time and energy here today. We have a tremendous and pretty fabulous event planning team that helped us to arrive to this moment together. So I just want to thank everyone for helping us to be here at the same time on the same Zoom link and everything, and for a topic and on a day that's so important. Today, we're going to be talking about gender expansive concepts and practices for college leaders. I appreciate your time and energy. The structure of our meeting today and of our time together is such that we'll have the first 60 minutes devoted to some content and an activity where you'll go into breakout rooms about gender pronouns. We'll talk about gender identity and gender expression, and you will leave with very practical tools and resources that we have built especially for you. And don't worry, we're going to be, throwing things into the chat, links to documents, but we will also follow up after this with an email to any of the links. So no fret, you won't miss anything if you can't copy and get to those links in time for our session, because they will be there for you afterwards, okay? So I want to thank the LGBT plus club student leaders and their fierce, I think mama bear is how Amy describes themselves, for inviting me, and for the student leadership team, student involvement team, for their work and leadership. Here's a little bit of our roadmap where we're going for this time together. So first, I'm going to ground us in some common language. I don't want to assume that you're coming in, knowing all the words, knowing all the concepts. We're going to ground in some common language together, knowing that words and language are very powerful, and also that we always want to leave room for how individuals self-identify their experiences of words and how they make meaning of it. For the purpose of learning, I'll provide some definitions that you can I kind of think about it how I have my glasses, off. If I'm looking at a definition, I'm kind of holding it in a way that it's a little bit blurry and up to interpretation for whoever is holding that identity, for them to share what it means to them, okay? Then we'll move into an overview. What is gender identity? What is gender expression? What is biological sex? And why do we talk about those three in connection to one another? And how in our society do we actually often lump them into one category of gender, when actually they're pretty nuanced and pretty distinct in some very important ways. Then we're going to talk about gender expansive practices, and we're going to talk about them in two different buckets. And these two different buckets are, one, just looking at a culture of names and pronouns in our daily life, whether it's our personal or our professional, and other maybe hats that we wear, but also specifically in the classroom. There are practices that have become known as model practices for promoting trans-affirming campus climate. Now, because of our time limitations, we don't have time to go over the long list of different functional areas and student services that there's actually a lot of model practices out there, but I'm going to give you a resource list so that you can continue that learning after our time today. And those resources are not only going to be ones that are available at Inver Hills, but they're going to be some that are local to the Twin Cities and also national resources. Then we're going to center with student voices so that you can hear from them directly what their experiences and recommendations are as well. So let's ground in some common language. If you notice, the color scheme that I chose to go with is the transgender flag. And so there's different iterations of this flag. You might see it combined with a rainbow flag. You might see it with a black or a black and brown stripe through it. There's many different community created iterations of this. And this is kind of the origin. This is like the base color scheme for the transgender flag. And today on Transgender Day of Visibility, it's important flag and symbol to ground in. So some of the common language, first, we might hear the word cisgender or cis. Now, this word comes from some of our sciences, and we might think about the phrase aligns with. Okay, cis means to be in alignment with. And so for oversimplification, we might imagine that, okay, for a cisgender person, the gender that was assigned to that person at birth is in alignment or is equal to the gender identity that person has today. Okay, and so you might hear a shorthand cis or cis. And so we might say cis folks, cis individuals, cis humans, right? Cis people have a gender identity that matches the one they were told they were at birth. Okay, and I'm oversimplifying this so that we can kind of ground in some of the nuances as we move forward. So kind of for the purpose of now knowing, kind of what transgender means, one definition, again, we're kind of holding it as if I, my nearsighted self, I have sort of a relationship where I have a definition, but I know that people define it for themselves in other specific ways, and all that those truths are okay together. So transgender meaning the gender that was assigned to an individual at birth is different than the gender identity that person knows themselves to be today. And that we might use a shorthand as trans. And so sometimes I might use, and here definitely college students today say queer and trans as another word for LGBTQ as kind of an umbrella way to describe LGBTQ plus communities. And so here, if we ground in the word for transgender, there's so many different labels that people might use that actually fall under what we might picture as an umbrella for transgender community. And so we hear the shorthand trans, and now we're kind of grounding in maybe what some of the similarities and differences are when we hear, okay, cisgender, transgender, right? Now, when we think about two additional terms, I'm first going to talk about gender nonconforming, and then we're going to talk about non-binary. So gender nonconforming, again, here's a definition that I'm going to explain to you a little bit about what it means to me. So gender nonconforming meaning not conforming to gender binary norms and expectations. A lot of gender identity and gender expression has to do with how limiting and how constricting the gender binary is. And when we think about binary, right, we're presenting two boxes, male, female, just to oversimplify it. And that those that actually gender and biological sex are not neatly contained into containers, right? And really in any multitude of containers. It is quite an array, it's quite a diverse array that we find in the human species, for example, of ways that people express, ways that people identify, ways that bodies, physical bodies exist as well. And so if we think about gender nonconforming, this is one definition of it. For me, gender nonconforming is something that I identify with. I identify as a masculine of center woman who is gender nonconforming. I don't conform to what we say that, good ladies or women in our society are supposed to fall into, although I was socialized as a young girl and then a woman as an adult. Right? And so gender nonconformity to me means I resist those systems, but I also kind of play within them in terms of finding ways to express my gender. And sometimes those shift on a day-to-day basis. Okay, so again, here's one definition, and I just shared a little bit of, yes, I hold this in that way, and I have my own words and meaning that are all true, okay? Non-binary, we are seeing a lot more non-binary and gender nonconforming, gender expansive, gender creative kids and young people in our society that are visible, right? We don't actually have proof that there's a larger amount of those young people. We actually just know that they're more visible now. And so non-binary could mean a spectrum of gender identities that aren't exclusively feminine, and they're not exclusively masculine, okay? I think about a lot of different NB or non-binary folks that I know, and they like to play with gender just how I said I do as a gender nonconforming person. It may shift moment to moment, year to year, day to day, and that if they understand gender as not something that can be contained in these two box or binary systems. Okay, so a lot of our creating culture around gender expansiveness is about really not holding the truth of gender and sex in these two boxes because they don't fit. They do not fit. And they actually limit all of our abilities to express our gender in ways that are true for us. Now, as we talk about some of those kind of core and grounding definitions, one of the things for us to kind of sit with for a few moments is this idea of and additional concepts around gender identity, gender expression, sex assigned at birth, and how does that all connect with how people perceive our gender as well. So first, if we look at this center image of the brain, okay, our gender identity is our internal sense of self as a gendered person. Now, this can change and shift over our lifespan. And for some people, it changes and shifts quite dramatically. And for some people, it might remain pretty similar as they go along their life journey. Now, your gender identity is internal to yourself. No one else will know your gender identity unless you choose to share that with other people, okay? Because it is your internal sense, this is the words that you might use to describe your gender. They might be labels or phrases or imagery that comes to mind when you think about your sense of self as a gendered person, okay? Now, a lot of our gender identity is not known to the outside world, right? But what we do when we create a culture where people can share the names that they feel respected by, the pronouns they feel respected by, we're actually making we're expanding our culture in a way that we are not assuming someone's internal sense of self. We're not assuming their gender identity by using language that we're ascribing to them. And that's, if we look at the relationship between gender attribution, right? How other people perceive us, how they read us, how they observe our body, our mannerisms, the way that we express our gender, and they might use pronouns accordingly, or they might ask, questions about our personal life that they may be making gendered assumptions based on what is our gender expression. So our gender expression is actually the outward manifestation. It's the outward way that we communicate our gender at any given moment on any given day, and that actually within the span of a day, that can change pretty drastically for different people. For me and my gender expression, I might express it differently when I'm in a meeting with certain, colleagues or teammates or individuals based on how I'm reading that I can be my authentic self in that environment and how safe it is for me to be my authentic self. My gender expression might change. I might actually change my posture if I'm walking into a women's restroom because I don't want people to do that thing they do, read my whole body, look right at my chest and see if I actually belong in there, right? My gender expression might change to make sure that I'm a little bit more safe when I go to these different environments. Now, I'm not saying that that's the right way that it should be. I'm just saying that that's how myself and a lot of other trans folks navigate their environment. We choose how to express our gender. Sometimes in our classrooms and with our instructors, we might get certain signs from them that it's okay to be my authentic self, or maybe I need to just be, this other kind of type of student or type of individual so that I can remain safe. So that might determine my gender expression. So your gender expression is this whole big bucket of mannerisms, your voice, your tone, how much physical space you take up in a room, how much verbal space you take up in a room or a space, the different pieces of jewelry that we choose to wear or not wear, and where on our body we might choose to wear them, how we cut our hair or not cut our hair, we groom our body or don't groom our body, right? There are norms and expectations for all of these things based on that gender binary in our larger society. So we all choose, whether we do it, for most of us, pretty unconsciously, meaning we don't in the morning say, I'm going to express my gender in this way today, right? We don't have those words kind of on a ticker tape going, across the news cycle for the day. But we do it very unconsciously because we've been developing it over years and years of socialization. Now, for a smaller percentage of us, we think about our gender expression and our gender identity constantly. We think about safety. We think about planning our restrooms use. We think about whether we can access a gym in safer times, and whether we'll have a changing room that's safe for us to actually use that community pool or use those exercise equipment accordingly, things like that. So a lot of us think about our gender expression all the time. And what I'll offer is that, and this is for me, I think, what would it look like to actually be freed up to focus on my academics or focus on my work with that percentage of time that I have to be thinking about my safety, that I have to be thinking about restrooms, that I have to be thinking about where am I going to put my name and my pronouns so I'm not misgendered or, called a name that actually no longer has any resonance to who I am today. So what would it look like to kind of just free up that emotional weight? And I don't know what that looks like yet, but part of the reason that you're here today is that you want to create that together. And I believe that you are and that you will. And so now we've talked about your internal sense, which is your gender identity. No one knows that unless you share it outwardly. Your gender expression, which is how you outwardly communicate your gender. And then we've talked a little bit about gender attribution. So constantly in our society, we are making observations, we're reading other people's genders. So imagine that in non-pandemic times that we're walking up to, let's say we're at, I don't know, the Mall of America. Okay, a lot of my family that visits, they want to go there. I'm like, I don't know why, but okay, yes, let's go there, fine. Let's imagine that we're walking in the parking lot and we're moving together towards the front doors. Now, who's going to open it for one another, right? Don't some of those gender dynamics show up and people might perceive, oh, that I open the door for you or you open the door for the other person. And sometimes those unconscious processes help me to realize, oh yeah, it's not just about how I sense it, how I understand my gender and how I express it. It's about how other people are observing it and making conclusions based off that gender. And then they're operating within this gender binary. So, this person feels an obligation to open the door for me, and so on and so forth, right? So we kind of get the sense that gender attribution, the way that we're interacting with other people and other people are interacting with us, is based on these perceptions. So what would it look like if we actually created a culture where people could self-define how they, what kind of norms, what kind of language around their gender that would be used for them, right? Because if I'm someone who only likes gender neutral pronouns, and because gender neutral and non-binary, that's a core sense of who I am, I'm not going to want to be subscribed to norms for women, for example. So in an example that we might use guys and gals as language, right? When we're kind of opening up our classroom environments. And so someone might say, oh, but I'm neither. So then where do I fit into that? So language is very powerful. And sometimes we're making these perceptions very noticeable to other people in our environment. So that's a little bit about the interplay between these three. Now let's talk about sex assigned at birth for a moment. So sex assigned at birth, that language is very intentional. There is a lot more advocacy happening recently around this process that happens most of the time at the moment of childbirth, but sometimes it happens, when the parent is getting an ultrasound and they say bump or no bump, right? And that's the very medical way that we often make observations about biological sex, which we talk about in our society as what is the gender of the baby. You see how quickly those get overlapped as the same thing, but they're not, because biological sex is actually our hormones, right, which are internal to ourselves. It is our internal sex organs, and it is our external sex organs, and it is our chromosomes. It is the interplay of all of those. It is the combination of all of those, not any single one. However, the external genitalia is the one in which medical community, folks that are present to assist with the childbirth process, that they're assigning that what they call gender, but it's actually biological sex, but they're actually not doing often any hormone testing or know the chromosomes of the child or their internal organs as well. And so we're making something oversimplified that's actually pretty complex. Now, when we think about how the two box or the binary system works for females and males, we actually have a pretty sizable population that would fall under a larger category called intersex. And what we know on our continent that we are on together right now, presumably, maybe most of us are here. Some of us might be living that global life right now, which good for you, that the intersex population is about 1 in every 1,500 to 1 in every 2,000 new births on the continent. Okay, it's about the same rate of redheaded folks in our society. So we can imagine that, okay, about how many folks with red hair do we run into in our lives? Okay, that's probably the same amount of people that we might imagine in an intersex population. Okay, so just to kind of give you an example of comparable population sizes. Okay, so we have intersex folks, and that is about 200 different conditions that can happen between the chromosomes, hormones, internal and external sex organs. Now, a lot of intersex people don't actually know they're intersex. We don't get our chromosomes tested. We don't have hormone testing. We don't look at our internal sex organs, right? Unless some sort of medical or health issue comes up where we want to examine further. And then we might discover this information, or we might not discover it at all. So a lot of intersex people are not, they're not records of such. And so there's a lot more research to be done in that area. Now, but you see the cycle here, right? That we are saying, you know, I have a sibling who's pregnant right now and constantly being asked, is it a boy or is it a girl, right? It starts right then. And they're saying, what's the gender? And I'm saying, what's the sex? Have you had sex? You know, have you had the doctors do testing? Has there been blood work drawn, or is it just bump or no bump? And honestly, for a lot of folks, it's bump or no bump is the designation. So I've asked my sibling to say, well, it's, you know, a boy until they tell us otherwise, right? Because we're confusing gender and sex. So we know the sex of the baby. We think we know the sex of the baby, and that their gender identity may be vastly different from what we are reading in the womb, okay? Fun story. So baby talk is a lot of my life right now with my sibling. So this is to ground us as we move forward in thinking about the possibilities of a gender expansive culture where people can have, they can be invited to share language that really matches their gender identity. And we're not making those assumptions based on their gender expression because we know the differences and the distinctions there. So we're going to move into some gender expansive practices, and in a few moments, you're actually we're going to invite you to some breakout rooms so that you can practice introducing yourselves and start to have conversations about what would it look like in a culture where everyone is invited to share their names and their pronouns if they use them. And we created that environment where people feel comfortable that they're going to share them, because then they're going to be respected in that environment as well. Okay. So in this first bucket of names and pronouns, we want to have this environment where, you know, we're constantly reintroducing ourselves. And I use these kind of stickers. I know we haven't been to in-person events in a while, but think back in the day when we had programs and events on campus, and we might have name badges or name stickers, and someone might fill in their own name and then have a spot to fill in their own pronouns, so that when they're introducing themselves to people, that both of those are elements of that will be repeated and mirrored back to them in that event or program. So we want to imagine, okay, that's in one program or event. What would it look like if that was every classroom meeting, every advising meeting, every time that we welcomed a student to our dining services or to our nurse's office or healthcare office, et cetera, right? And so what would it look like for this environment to exist? And see, I should not use nurse's office. You see how tricky that is? That shows up in my mind as, so that's a very gender binary assumption. Let me make a note to not use that language. Instead, I'll use clinic, healthcare office, health and wellness office, and not assume that the only people that provide those services are nurses in our environment. Okay, you see what someone that does this work every day, that you make mistakes, and I'm going to show you how to move through them. So I apologize for that language, and I'm going to actually make a mental note to anchor in that new language so that I reduce the likelihood that that will happen again. Okay, thanks for your flexibility with me as I work through that. So we want to produce this environment where even if we're on a committee or even if we're in a group together and we think, oh, I already know them, I see them every week, we see the same people, we have the same meeting every week, having the culture where we reintroduce ourselves, we can capture any name changes and any pronouns changes that are happening from week to week, day to day. And that is the most real-time way to capture like anyone that might be encountering a social transition, or any kind of just, any kind of way in which they're noting, hey, this is how I want to be referred to in this environment. All right, so you see some examples of pronouns here, but on this next slide, we're going to talk about all the different places that these might show up. So, our names, and sometimes in our university systems, especially when we have, some of it's kept centrally at something like the Minnesota State system, some of it's housed locally at the campus, that we might have record systems that we don't even know where the name data showed up from, right? We may have put that in 2009 and it's showing up, 10, 12 years later. So our registrar functions and our records functions, those are an important place to be able to track names. Then, because what happens is when we're interacting with a record, we might make assumptions based on how we make gendered assumptions on that name and then use pronouns accordingly. So you see the kind of interplay between those. Names also show up on ID cards. So the ability to have someone's preferred name on an ID card has been really, really helpful for me to have. And I've heard people in the Minnesota State system saying, well, our security folks, they like to have a legal name. I said, you can put the legal name on the back of the card, actually. Did you think about that? So you put the preferred name on the front, put the legal name on the back. And actually, I would argue that in most of our university systems, we also have like star ID or some other number and sequence that is only for that individual. So why wouldn't we just use that? Do we need legal name at all? Anyways, I'll leave you with that question. I would argue no, we don't need it most often when we're dealing with internal campus processes. Directories. So sometimes our directory pulls our legal name from who knows what software system, and we might be emailing someone outside the campus or inside the campus, and it might pull a different name than the one we feel respected and that we feel an affinity with today. Class rosters, diplomas, our transcripts. I have heard of students who will leave their transcripts at another institution because they went through a gender transition and don't want their incoming college to know that they went through a gender transition. So they will lose credits. They will sacrifice those credits that they went to. And as someone who went to a community college and had to advise myself on transferring, I know that that is a huge sacrifice to make. That is your time, that is your labor, that is your money. And as a first-gen student, it's a lot more than that, right? And then our learning management system. So how can our names show up in something like Brightspace, right? But back when I worked at Min State, it was D2L, but now Brightspace, right? Or any kind of learning management system that we're using for our courses. So these are just a few of the places where names and pronouns show up. And these are more of our systems, right? And I'm going to talk more about our in-person or interpersonal interactions. So when we think about pronouns, we think, oh, there's all these new pronouns emerging. They're actually not new. We've had so many different gender pronouns available. Some of them trace back to the 1400s in Old English, that we've had so many different pronouns in this particular language. We have seen throughout different years and decades that some of them rise to the top as a lot more popular, and kind of that reemergence is happening now. With neopronouns, actually. And so there's been a reemergence, like this category of pronouns that are increasingly used in place of she, he, or they when referring to a person. And they're most often used by trans, non-binary, and or gender non-conforming people. So I'll give you an example of some of these neopronouns. So, and just to note that when we talk about gender neutral, we talk about using they as a singular. We've had quite an emergence of writing, communications, journalism, scientific, writing and language professional associations that have all said, when you have the opportunity to use a singular they, it is absolutely okay. We just had the AP manual, who I used the 6th edition for a very long time, and we just came out with the 7th edition. That one clearly stipulates that using a singular they is okay. There are some instances where you would not use it, but they said actually for the majority of the cases you can use a singular they. Okay, and so actually in as early as the 1400s, using they as singular is actually a very common practice. It was accepted as an everyday practice. And then the pendulum kind of, swung, and we said, okay, no, let's just use it for plural, for more than one person. And now we're back to, yeah, but why not? Why can't we expand our language possibilities to encapsulate people's genders that don't fit in these gender binaries, which are shaped by only 2 sets of pronouns? Why can't we expand that, right? To invite people in. So here's some examples of neopronouns. We have they, me, they. We have Spivak or am, air, z, and here. And I've heard people say xe as she. And so if you've heard it pronounced differently, I think I usually refer to Wikipedia for the most up-to-date, community-based, crowdsourced information for different sets of pronouns to give the history, to give how to pronounce them, and to give you an idea of how long some of these pronouns have existed. Now, I will share that there's one tool that I constantly recommend, and it's called -18. And it's a great web tool that you can pull up, 2 p.m. or 2 a.m., whatever your vibe is and your rhythm, that you can practice using this tool to use new pronouns, right? Because practicing is so key to reconditioning your mind, right? So causing and creating those anchors so that you replace different rules that you've learned over the years about how to conjugate certain pronouns in a sentence. So we're going to give you some time to practice introducing yourselves. And then what I recommend as your next steps is if there's any pronouns that we've talked about today that are new to you, or any statements that are new to you regarding gender pronouns, I would encourage you to use the -18 tool. It'll give you about 10 different sentences, and it'll give you 3 to 4 opportunities for each sentence to get the correct set of pronouns conjugated in there. And then it will move you on gently. If you're not ready for that particular sentence at this particular moment, you can continue practicing with other sentences. So when we think about a culture where we're invited to introduce ourselves each time we see someone again, we might think of these as core statements. So, hi, I'm name and my pronouns are she, her. Hi, I'm Sabby and my pronouns are he, him. Hi, I'm Sabby and my pronouns are they, them. Hi, I'm Sabby and I go by Sabby only, right? Or name only. Some people don't like gender pronouns, whether they're neutral or specific, used in reference to them at all. Some people don't want to opt into this gender binary system that we've created as a society. They just don't agree that they see themselves a part of it at all. So some people would just say, I just prefer my name. And then you might use, hi, I'm Sabby, and actually any or all pronouns work for me. So these are some statements. For those of you that are just starting on your journey of using pronouns and introducing yourself, you might use one of these statements. For those of you that have been using them for a while, you probably already have a statement that you really vibe with and that you really like. So feel free to continue using that. So we're coming to that moment where you're going to get some practice in smaller groups. And thanks to Nikki and Jenny and team for already determining the breakout rooms. Nikki or Jenny, any comments before we go into our breakout rooms? And they're going to drop a link to a prompt, which you can open up on your screen to engage in this activity, but you're going to be practice introducing yourself using one of these statements. And if you get done quickly with your group before the time's up, which will have 5 minutes, then there's some questions at the bottom of the document that you can discuss with your group as well. Perfect. To share was the -18 app. And so it not not only is going to be linked on your resources document, but you can actually, practice it at any time of the day. And it's not one of those really nosy tools where, if you're playing a game, it tells everyone in your Facebook community that you like got to the second, level of Bejeweled or whatever these games are. It's just for you to know it's just you to know your progress. Okay. So not everyone in the globe needs to know your level with Z in here and they and that pronouns, for example. So this is a tremendous tool, and I work it on browser just to have later on when you want to just connect that practice. One of the things it reminds me of is when we were in a class together that I shared this activity that really will help you realize how much we use gender pronouns. So for a day, for a full day, commit yourself to replacing any gender-specific pronouns that you're going to use, and just don't use them at all. Just figure out other ways to maneuver yourself through that sentence or through that question or through whatever you were sharing with some other alternative that is gender neutral. And don't use she, her, or he, him for an entire day. And it will really blow your mind as to how many thousands of times we use gender-specific pronouns and we might not be consciously aware of it. And so it kind of gives you an idea of how much unlearning and relearning there is to recondition our brains so that they can maneuver very seamlessly the next time we have the opportunity to use gender-neutral language. Now, the thing that I want to share about something like introductions with pronouns is that when we create this gender expansive culture, it gives everyone the option to share. Sorry, my internet might be choppy here for a second. Let me close out some of my windows. It gives everyone the option to share their pronouns, but sharing your pronouns is not mandatory, okay? Now, pronouns are your personal information. So for me, Sabby, I would say I, love to share my pronouns because it helps people to know how to mirror them back to me. But I would never go around in a meeting or a committee or a classroom where everyone introduces their pronouns and then one person doesn't. I would never go back and say, hey, you didn't say your pronouns. That person may not use pronouns. That person may not feel comfortable sharing them in that room or ever. That person might be the first time they ever heard of gender pronouns. So now they're going to go Google it when they leave that, meeting or classroom environment. So you never want to make assumptions about why someone's not sharing their pronouns. And that's why we don't mandate that someone shares it. We're trying to create a culture where everyone is invited to make their choice about how they introduce themselves and how they share their pronouns. Okay, so that's usually a question I get. Is it as a practice that give everyone the option? So let's say you make mistakes with someone's name or someone's pronouns. And I will say that I think about and talk about and train about pronouns constantly. And I make mistakes with pronouns. I can name a time last week where I made mistakes. I can name a time 2 weeks before that where I made a few mistakes, on a meeting on Monday, one on Wednesday, the evening on Thursday, so anyways, we don't need to go into it, but it's not just one. So I want to move from assuming that like, what if there was mistakes to there'll be mistakes. And I'm going to give you this process of how to move through it. And we call it acknowledge. And this is from a friend of mine named Shane Wally, who worked at UT Austin and works in Texas in education. So one, this process of acknowledge says, number one, acknowledge your mistake, okay? Acknowledge that something happened, that was an error. Apologize for that error. 3, correct yourself to say it accurately, whatever the name or pronouns or both. And then move on with whatever you were saying. Were you inviting that person to coffee? Were you inviting them to a virtual, catch up? Like what was it that you were going to say before you stumbled a little on the name or pronouns, okay? This process is really, really helpful and something that I use and move through. So before we get to, we have another activity set up, but don't stay. We're talking about this second area of practices called the classroom practice. So anything pertaining to how we as instructors, how we as faculty, how we shape the learning environment. And as someone who's taught undergraduate, who's taught graduate, who's taught online, who's taught hybrid and in person, I know that there's a lot of overlap in practices, okay? So don't worry that, you know, they're all relevant to the virtual environment as well as in person. So one, you're going to create this statement that explains how you use pronouns. And little secret, I create one for you. So you're going to have a template to work from. You don't have to start from scratch. You can modify it for your purposes. You're going to have it include your pronouns in your email signature. This is something that tells students and any colleagues that receive an email from you that you're not just assuming that the gender binary is alive and well, and we just make assumptions based on people's gender. We actually are thinking about our pronouns. And so that is a culture that we're trying to create. Before the first day of class, you know, the students would see that in your email signature. I like to send the week before class starts email like, hey, excited to meet everybody. Make sure you have the textbooks, make sure you have this, send me any questions. Students, hey, the course roster that I have, I think it has legal names on it. So if you go by another name, please do reach out to me. If you go by a set of pronouns you want to share, feel free to share that before we start class. I'll make note of it. Okay, so these are some practices before the first day of class. Now in the syllabus statement, here's the kind of formula. You want to talk expectations for how to communicate and share pronouns, how we go about respect them, you model it yourself, how we mirror that for each other, how we move through mistakes. You could even list out that acknowledge step by step, which you have in your template that you can use after this session today. How to move when misgendering happens. Okay. Oh, my internet is going in and out here. I live in the country. That's probably one. And then expectations for changes to names and pronouns, any bright space or other technical tips for students' name, and then any resources for learning, which I've provided for you in the syllabus template. It might be as simple as the Miss 18 app that we just talked about. And so one of the links that Jenny or Nikki is going to drop into the chat for you is a working document, and it's basically a template that you can use to adapt for your syllabus development. And it can cover all the different pieces as well. Oh, great. Nikki's giving me a tip. Let me mute my video so that my audio can come through clear. Thanks for your flexibility and patience. So as out in the chat, you will be provided it afterwards, so no worries if you don't catch it, that you can just modify this. I'm a big fan of not starting from scratch and not recreating the wheel. So that is a special gift from me to you. During the first class meeting, you can model as the instructor how to then share your pronouns by introducing yourself. I am a first-gen student, and I know that when I worked with students at Metro State and when I've taught community college classes, I'm especially aware that sometimes students know how to refer to you generally. So I say, you can call me Sabby, you can call me Dr. Labor, you can call me Dr. Sabby, and those are the three options. So what I'm telling students is when you try to call me Ms. or Mrs., like that's not in that range of three. You know, I guess I would settle for MX or mixed labor, but I didn't ask me that yet. So, you know, I think that will be forthcoming. But I give students the options just in case maybe someone in their family has not been to college yet and they actually don't know how to talk to an instructor yet. Because that's how I was in college. I was like, how do I even refer to you? I don't know what this college thing is about. Okay, so you model that, and that's how I tell students, like, okay, and then you can refer to me in these pronouns, and I will write them up, and you'll see students taking notes. I also have them in my syllabus. Okay, so just in case students are overwhelmed with the first day of class, they have it in the syllabus. I would clarify in that first class meeting, as anything in the syllabus, what my expectations for name and pronoun use are. Okay, and that helps to have it in the syllabus statement that you could just refer to it and answer any questions. And if you do a student information sheet or a student contact sheet in class, you'll capture a preferred name.
Hey, everybody. I think we just had a bit of technical difficulties as Sabby has dropped out, but they'll be right back on.
Hi, I'm back. Sorry about that. That was abrupt. Nikki, can you all hear me? Yeah, I see some people. Nikki might be frozen now. All right. Okay. I think I'm going to continue on. Thumbs up. Are we good? Zoom tech and living on a farm. Okay. Story of our lives. Great. So next in the first class meeting, you can use the student information, and I'm going to give you a folder with templates for that as well. We're just moving with grace. You know this Zoom life. Okay. Other classroom practices. So we talked about before class and class, now thereafter. Reinforce if there's cases that come in where, okay, now we need to buy, hey, just a reminder, before you contribute to class, hey, Sabby, she, her, thoughts on the meetings are XYZ, right? Students that model how to move through mistakes and respond to misgendering. We go ahead and we have a couple of volunteers who are going to read the role play activity. I think, I can't remember I think Rachel has the names of those.
Yeah, hey everybody. So my name is Rachel. I use she, her pronouns, and I will just jump in here and lead the role play activity. So I will be acting as the narrator. Jenny and T, would you like to introduce yourselves as well if you're still on?
I'm Katima. Can you guys hear me? I'm Katima Wilson. I go by T, and I use she, her, hers pronouns.
My name is Jenny. My pronouns are she and her pronouns.
All right, perfect. So we're just going to kind of walk through this role play activity. So I'll be acting as the narrator. So I'm just going to give you kind of an overview of the situation. Jasmine is a student in Professor Salazar's algebra class. Professor Salazar is new to gender pronouns and asks the students to introduce themselves using their name and pronouns on the first day of class. Unfortunately, Professor Salazar has moments where he doesn't remember a student's name or their pronouns when he calls on them during class. First, we're going to share last week's classroom interaction with Professor Salazar and Jasmine. Then we're going to show an alternate version of the interaction where Professor Salazar moves through his mistakes with Jasmine's name and pronouns. So this is last week's interaction.
Good afternoon, guys and gals. Welcome to week 3 of our class. Can any of you guys share the answer to problem number 4 on your homework? Yes, Yasmin, thank you. Go ahead.
It's pronounced Jasmine, Professor.
Of course, go ahead.
The answer is 32.78 square feet.
Yes, that is correct. Thank you. Now, class, how did she arrive at this answer?
Sorry to interrupt, Professor, but I actually don't use she and her pronouns. I go by they and them.
Yes, of course. I don't really see how what that has to do with mathematics, Jasmine. Now let's move on, class.
After class, Professor Salazar regrets his response to Jasmine after hearing so many different pronouns and names during introductions in the first week of class. They and them pronouns and any gender-neutral pronouns were completely new to him. Now, let's see an alternate version of this interaction with Professor Salazar using the acknowledge-ize method for moving through mistakes with names and pronouns, as well as modeling gender-neutral language.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to week 3 of our class. Can anyone share the answer to problem number 4 on your homework? Yes, Yasmin, thank you. Go ahead.
It's pronounced Jasmine, Professor.
Of course, Jasmine, my apologies. Jasmine, go ahead.
The answer is 32.78 square feet.
Yes, that is correct. Thank you. Now, class, how did she arrive at this answer?
Sorry to interrupt, Professor, but I actually don't use she and her pronouns. I go by they and them.
Yes, of course. My error, Jasmine. Sorry about that, class. How did they arrive at this answer?
After class, Professor Salazar feels embarrassed about mispronouncing Jasmine's name and gender pronouns. He doesn't want that to happen again for any of his students. He finds a practice tool online called -18 and begins practicing using they, them, ze, here, and they, them pronouns because those are the newest to him. He's determined to not make this mistake again.
Thank you so much to our leaders for reading that scenario. So I hope that that is maybe a helpful grounding in some possible ways to use the acknowledge-I's. Now we're going to move right into hearing our student perspectives for the remainder of our time together. And so my apologies, I ran us over a few minutes here. Thanks for your patience with some of the tech life issues that are impacting my Wi-Fi today. And we'll get our student panelists up and ready here. Give us a technical moment.